Hi again everyone, I'm Minnie Small and today I'm going to be sharing how you can create dynamic sketchbook illustrations with paint and pencil. In this video we'll be adding depth and expressive details to a leafy, flowery gouache painting. For this painting I'm using the Strathmore Mixed Media Sketchbook in 5.5 by 8 inches, Maimeri Gouache, Princeton brushes, Lyra Polycolour pencils. Starting out by finding a nice blank page in our sketchbook and clipping it open to keep it flat. We've got some coloured pencils here in yellow, dark green, dark pink and red, a round watercolour brush in size 6 and a long round brush in size 2 with a fine tip. We've got our limited palette of gouache paints in magenta, cyan, black, white, yellow and some red, a palette to mix our paint on, some water to wash our brushes in and a rag to dry off our brushes as well. So we're going to start out by sketching some flowers in the pink pencil, drawing a petal shape that's open at the bottom and another one that connects with it underneath, and then coming out from the middle a couple more thin petals. And then in the middle just a squiggly line to show where the pollen will be. And then we're going to draw another one, just a smaller one. We're going to change around the angles as well. And then just draw a single petal with another petal underneath. And then you can draw little petals or little buds around the page as well. And keep drawing those flowers around the page at different angles and different sizes, and add in those extra larger petals and those little ones all around. Now we're going to switch to that dark green pencil and start drawing in the leaves. All the leaves will be coming out from behind the flowers, so they'll sort of fan out, again at different sizes and at different angles. And we'll continue to do that around the page. Some of them can layer over each other, some can be behind each other, and some can be behind the individual petals as well. Then finally we'll switch to the yellow pencil to draw another layer of leaves in, again just going in behind what we've got in there already, filling in lots of the gaps that we've got, and adding a few just floating around as well. Then we can get our paint ready, so I like to have quite a lot of white on my palette just so that some of it can stay pure white while I'm mixing the rest of it in with other colours. We're just going to start with the yellow, magenta and red for now, and wet our brush using the rag to dab off any excess water and mix a nice peachy pink with the white, magenta and a little bit of yellow. Then we're going to start painting in the petal, and every time I dip into the paint again I just vary the colour. I don't wash off my brush in between, which makes it easy to just blend one colour into another, and the intention here is to just have loads of variation in this colour of the petal. Again, not washing my brush in between and just blending on the page as I go. Another way that you can vary the colour throughout the petal is to paint it in as one flat colour or as close to a flat colour as you can, and then while it's still wet just going in with the other colours that you want to use, so adding some white, adding some yellow, just in little patches here and there and blending it out as you go. And then just paint in the rest of those smaller petals, again adding in some more magenta, some more yellow, and then going on to paint the other petals in the same way, with the individual petal adding a darker petal underneath, and still continuing to add bits of yellow and bits of white and more pink, and still not really needing to wash your brush in between, just letting one colour blend into another as you paint on the page. For those smaller buds I'm starting with a lighter pink down at the bottom, going into a darker pink for the top portion and blending those on the page. And if you're having trouble blending one colour into another, you can go back into the lighter colour and blend that upwards into the darker colour. And I'm just going to continue on this way with the rest of the flowers, painting them either in a flat colour and then going in with more details as I go, or just changing up the colour that I have on my brush with every time that I go back to my palette. And you can also change up the shade of pink that you're using as your base. You can go for a more peachy pink for some of the colours and a more baby pink for the other ones. Now I've just dipped into the magenta paint and I'm adding a few small dots to each of the flowers and petals, just completely at random. Doing the same with some yellow paint, more dots all over. And then once more with some white paint as well. Now I'm taking some yellow and filling in the pollen in the middle of those flowers. and then adding some red to that yellow and dotting in some shading onto that pollen portion. And finally, just going in with some white again on the pollen portion, just with some dots. Now as we move on to the leaves, we can add some blue and some black to our palette and mix some yellow with that blue and some black as well to make a nice green. And just start painting in the leaves in the same way. You can start with some flat colour, or you can just vary the colour as you go, adding more yellow and more white and even more blue or black if you want to add some shading. But really the leaves should be around the same colour overall. You really don't need to focus on shadows or highlights or anything like that. We're going to be adding depth to this and shadows with the pencils later. So just continue on, making sure that the leaves are all in a similar shade of green as you go along. Some can be lighter and some can be darker, but you want them all to be a sort of medium green. And for this layer, we're just painting in the leaves that are outlined with the dark green pencil, and also remembering which ones are layering on top of which. Now we're adding a few more of those little dots with some yellow paint, just going through all of the leaves, adding some dots at random with yellow and white. And some darker little dots with some darker green as well. Now we're mixing a slightly darker green with a bit more black in it, a bit more of that dark blue, and we're going to paint in the rest of the leaves in the same way, all of the ones that were further back, the ones that we outlined with the yellow pencil. And finally finishing those with, again, some darker dots. And a mix of that green with a bit of white and a bit of blue in it to add a few little highlights as well. Now I'm mixing a dark blue, black, green colour. It's going to vary as we go along and you'll see that, but this is going to be the background colour. Also bear in mind that gouache paint dries lighter than it looks when it goes on, so this colour will be a bit less black when it dries. But I'm just going through, carefully going around all of the things that I have here in the foreground and varying up the paint colour as I go, just every time I go into my palette, adding some green, adding some black, adding some blue, and just being careful not to paint over anything that I've got on there already. And around the edges I'm also using whatever's left on my brush to fan out that edge. And I continued that for the rest of the background, and then went in with some pure yellow paint, as pure as it could be on this messy palette, and started adding in yet more dots, just random little highlights throughout. This could be some pollen that's bursting out, this could be some highlights on smaller leaves that are in the background. It just adds a little bit of depth and interest to this background, and just mixing some magenta with the white and doing the exact same thing, a few more dots here and there throughout that background. Now it's time to start with the shading, so we're going to grab our pencils and I'm just going to start outlining those petals. So in the same way that we drew them in earlier, just going around the edge of the smaller petals first and then outlining where the petal meets the pollen, and then shading right there in the middle so that we get an idea of the depth there, of the layers, lightly building layers of shading as I go. And continuing to outline the rest of the flower and shading around where that pollen is and underneath where the petals layer over each other. You can also add a bit more dimension with shading around the petal, and then just continue on in this way. When I get to areas I want to darken even more, I use a dark green to shade on top of where I've put the dark pink. And I also use that dark green to shade in the leaves as well, and add shadow to areas like the pollen. So the method for shading the leaves is exactly the same, outlining them with that dark green pencil, shading where the flower is layered over the leaf, and also shading some of the contour of the leaf itself, maybe showing where a leaf might curve, where some areas may be more in shadow, especially with the ones that are tucked behind other leaves, making sure that there's some shadow to show that one thing is behind another. And that's really what this pencil portion of this painting is all about. We're defining the shapes now, and we're using the pencil to add in layers that otherwise were sort of blending into each other. And we're also, for example, using this pink pencil to add some more detail. So I'm adding some lines along the petals and on the buds, just to show where there may be some sort of wrinkles and to give an idea of the sense of the shape. And so I just continue to go back and forth between the dark pink and the dark green, outlining and shading and adding some smaller line details. And as we come to the end here, I just want to thank you for joining me for this series of videos. I hope that I've been able to show that with a mix of paint and pencil, you can add depth with shadows and highlights and variations in colour. You can add finer details and add style to your paintings. I hope that you have enjoyed this time in your sketchbook with me, and I hope you can use some of these methods in your future paintings. Thanks for watching.